Yorkshire is full of beautiful towns and villages with illustrious histories. We're here in Pickering, North Yorkshire, to visit a very popular and very beautiful church, the Church of St Peter and St Paul. And we're here in Pickering now, which is a lovely and tourist-friendly town in North Yorkshire. And I'm here with Anna Hughes, teacher and archaeologist, and it's lovely around here, isn't it?
Yes, it's fantastic.
Oh, now Pickering started as a small settlement on the shores of a glacial lake. It was actually quite an ideal place for the settlers who once lived here, as not only did it have the glacial lake, but it was also very arable land and was surrounded by natural resources. And when I say arable land, it's reported in the Domesday Book to have had 27 ploughs. Ploughable land, or a plough, was a piece of taxable land which could be ploughed by 8 oxen. Now, the name Pickering is believed to have come from the Old English word Pickeringus, which literally means people on the ridge of a pointed hill. Now, after the Norman invasion, it was developed further with the building of a castle and a manor. Now, Anna, you know a bit more about the castle and Norman Pickering. What else could you tell us about it?
Yeah, so Pickering is a fantastic example of a Norman and medieval landscape, really, and a medieval townscape. We know that the church was probably established before the Normans arrived, probably in the Anglo-Saxon period. We've got some surviving Anglo-Saxon stonework inside the church that tells us this. But obviously when William the Conqueror arrives in the north in around 1069 to put down the harrying of the north, he wants to make sure that this area is defended and it is controlled by his earls. So he builds a castle at the other end of the town where the hill really rises, so he would have a really commanding view over this part of the county, really. This is a really, really common medieval and Norman landscape, with having the castle at one end of a town and one end of the street, and then having the church at the other end of the street. So it's really showing his power over the people. We've got really, really interesting early medieval and early ecclesiastical landscapes. So we've got early churches at Lastingham, which is famous for its crypt. It's likely to be the burial place of St Ked. And then we've also got St Gregory's Church at Kirkdale, which is really famous for its sundial, which probably dates to around the 1050s or 1060s.
Pretty old then.
Yes, definitely.
Pickering was also occupied by the parliamentarians during the English Civil War. Following this, it later blossomed into a very successful agricultural and market town. It was also home for a lot of nonconformist religions, such as Methodists and Quakers. In the 19th century, it became a hub for transport, as not only was it the centre of the stagecoach network, but it was also a huge part of the railway system, as in 1836 the Whitby Pickering Railway was established. However, it is the church behind us that is what we're here to visit today. So Anna, what is it about the approach to the church and about the outside of the church that makes this really special?
I mean, this is a great church, really, to tell us about the history of architecture, really. It's got some great phases in it, which is what we look for as archaeologists. We look for sculpture and we look for identifying features. So the graveyard is quite closed off. It's surrounded by buildings, really, so it's a really interesting approach to the church, and really draws your eye in. Really, to first of all the tower, which is 13th century from the lower stages, and then works its way up into the decorated period, which is mid 14th century. Some of it, obviously, we're not completely certain at times when things are built. But what's really draws your eye to this church is this fantastic porch, which is probably 15th century and probably built as part of a piece of wider patronage of the church, because this church and the town of Pickering was part of the land of the Duchy of Lancaster by the 14th century. So we've got a lot of money potentially going into this church, which we'll see when we go inside.
Talking of which, it is the interior design that really makes this a tourist hotspot for people coming to Pickering, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. That is what this church is really famous for. So the outside of the church, it's a bit of an every church really, is what my old lecturer kind of described it as. But the interior is what everyone comes for.
Tell you what, should we take a look inside?
Why not?
Let's go. It's a bit heavy, that door, isn't it?
Oh, it's a very heavy door, yes.
But then it just hits you when you first come in, doesn't it? Just, wow. Your eyes get immediately drawn to the murals just at the top of the walls.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It is the really defining feature of this church.
The impact as well when you walk in, just draws your eyes straight up to them, and these depict some quite horrible scenes, so I can only imagine the impact it would have had on someone living in the medieval period, just looking straight at these amazing pieces of art, but ones that depict quite gruesome and almost hellish sort of landscapes.
Yeah, well, they're really, really kind of lessons, aren't they?
Exactly. Should we take a closer look at them?
Yeah, of course, let's go.
Let's go for it. This first one, starting with this one up here, which ones do they depict going down?
Yes, so we've got a number of different scenes. So we've got St. George and the Dragon first. We've got St. Christopher with Christ on his back. We've then got Herod's feast and the execution of St. John the Baptist, which is quite grisly. And then we've got some really, really nice martyrdom scenes. So we've got the martyrdom of St. Edmund.
The martyrdom of St. Edmund's my personal favourite because he just looks mildly upset by the fact he's got arrows sticking out of him. He just looks a bit annoyed by it, that's all.
Yeah.
But then looking at this wall in comparison and this architecture, it looks quite different to this one. So would this have been a different phase of archaeological development?
Yeah, we've got a different phase here. So we've got a slightly later phase, not much later than the 12th century North Isle. This is the later 12th century, or maybe very early 13th century. So the real interesting thing about this isle is the beautiful kind of waterleaf capitals, so starting to evolve eventually into what we know as the Gothic period.
Of course, yeah.
So we can see some of that throughout the church as well. So we can see that Gothic coming in as we go through. And of course, we've got more wall paintings.
Even more, I know. It hits you. You see these first and then you look up this way.
Yeah.
So which ones would have been there? Which scenes would have been depicted in these ones then?
Yeah, so we've got St. Catherine here. I always feel like it looks like it should be in a Marvel comic strip.
I see it, yeah.
It's very, very cartoonish. And then we've got the 7 corporal acts of mercy along here. And then my favourite one is this one here, which is the descent into hell, which looks quite grisly. And then just on the other side, we also have the resurrection of Christ, telling the parishioners the stories and helping them. So, the quite a visual cue, but we do also have some Middle English written into particularly the St. Edmund's scene. So this is kind of really reflecting the increasing literacy in the 15th century as people become more literate.
And would we have known who made them?
We don't know who made these. Written records don't often survive. They don't tend to write down who made them unless you find the accounts.
Fantastic.
And unfortunately, we don't have the medieval accounts for Pickering Church.
Of course.
So it makes it a bit more difficult to find.
It's a bit of a shame, but again, at least we have these to observe and to treasure as well.
Yeah.
We have a look down here. There's some things that I want to talk about in regards to just normal churches, such as pews and stained glass windows.
Yes.
Should we have a walk down?
Let's go and have a look.
Let's go have a look. One other piece of church history that I find fascinating is one that's always often overlooked and never really thought about when talking about churches, and that's pews. Now, Pews were not really introduced into churches until around the 13th century. The word pew comes from the Old French word in the 14th century, meaning roughly balcony. Pews were really used as a place for people to start sitting down, particularly the old and infirm at first, but later on the wealthy, when preachers and sermons started getting really lengthy and started to really go on a bit, so people didn't want to be standing around for that long. Now, these pews here, these are from like the Victorian period, these ones really, aren't they? These are from later on.
Yeah, they are. They're from the 1880s or 1890s.
And another part of church history, another part of church architecture that everyone usually knows about but doesn't really look into the history of, I think, are stained glass windows. So it's been postulated that stained glass was used as far back as the Romans or ancient Egyptians, although it was really the Romans that first started using glass in windows, as before that it was mainly used in decoration. Stained glass has been found in monasteries dating as far back as the 7th century, although it wasn't really added until churches much later on. They were really used to enhance the architecture and aesthetic of churches, but also to tell certain stories. Now, what are the real stories that are being told here, or the stories of these churches here in Pickering?
There's some really lovely stories told in this stained glass, but it is actually all 19th century stained glass. Oh. So in the 16th and 17th centuries, a lot of medieval stained glass was destroyed. Firstly, during the reign of Edward VI as part of the iconoclasm, and then also by iconoclasts in the 17th century during the Civil War. So much of the stained glass that you see in churches today dates to usually the 18th or 19th century or later on in the 20th century. I think my favourite here is in the chancel. That's actually a really, really lovely depiction of the Last Supper that is dedicated to a parishioner in the 1870s. There's real skill to being able to manipulate the glass and create these beautiful, beautiful scenes.
Oh, definitely. Whilst this church holds many interesting and eye-catching features, it's worth noting that Pickering is a fantastic place to visit, whether you're a history lover or not. There's the castle and the church, of course, but there's also the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, the flea market, the art galleries, and antique shops. The Church of St. Peter and St. Paul's is fascinating, as it is not only a site of worship, but also a site of great tourist interest. And it is a place that has stood the test of time and survived the many centuries.